Hi. Music plays an important role. It's a very big part of my life. I'm very eclectic. My tastes range from opera to country and western. Go figure. But in meditation, music is a constant companion. And there's so much great stuff out there. I really owe a debt of thanks, appreciation, and gratitude to artists that have stuck to this milieu of spiritual music. And today, all this was occasioned by my listening on my daily bike ride to a beautiful song. And I remember it going something like left, right, 1, 2, yin, yang. And it raised the issue of duality to me. Apparent duality, maybe I should say. The polar opposites. The seeming existence of polar opposites would support you and me, us and them, tall and short, fat and thin, young and old, on and on and on. And these dualities, apparent dualities, seem to support the dualistic nature of being. But I would like to suggest another way to look at diametrically opposed or polar opposites. If we took something like human sexuality, where it's readily apparent that there's a male and a female, and the pairing of these two results in the miracle of birth. But as far as recreational sex, there seems to be a myriad of combinations. Yes. So I've learned to look at things in terms of, or a circle with degrees. A circle has 360 degrees. So in human sexuality, I prefer this as a guide to comprehending the incredible diversity, the possibilities. So the concept of 360 degrees with 180 being the connection to polar opposites. So begin to see this as indeed not dualism, that hate and love, happiness and sadness are just degrees of the same emotions. I'd like to also talk a little bit about the rise of monotheism, because it's the idea of one, mono. Now the ancients, almost without fail, practiced polytheism. There were many gods. And not only were there many gods, but the gods seem to possess the myriad of human frailties, things that with today's sensibility we wouldn't look at a jealous God or a deceitful God or the idea of trickster, which this universalism of the trickster seems to exist seems to know no cultural or geographical divides. And probably, I'm thinking of where this monotheism came from. But it was probably a desire that God should be perfect. And that I think in the culture of the ancients, we belong to God. Somewhere develop my God. My God is better than your God. A common theme in religiosity. Common theme. So the idea of a one God, all-powerful, all-seeing, perfect, the idea of perfection. And along with this perfection, there was room for nothing else. In fact, it became a sin to believe or to worship or to have images even of multiple gods. The commonality between the major monotheistic religions of today, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is that there's absolutely no room for anything but their concept. My way or the highway. I'm right, you're wrong. And it's really tough to argue with people that believe. In fact, there's no room at all for argument. And as a reaction, I think, a reaction to the limitations of monotheism, a school rose which was termed non-dualism, non-duality, that there could be only one. And in some ways, not too different from monotheism. This concept became a firm belief. And even though to me, non-dualism makes perfect sense, and ultimately, indeed, is the condition of the universe. But it seems to me, I've listened to a lot of the non-dualistic arguments, because one thing that was key to me was existence of the soul. Does the soul exist? Well, right from the get-go, right from the early introduction to non-dualistic thinking, it's pounded almost into you that there's no room for the existence of anything other than the non-dualistic nature of the universe. This argument, this schism, is part of religion, isn't it? Yeah, it seems inevitable. Buddhism has all its schools. Christianity was usually the Roman Catholic Church, and then all the other Christian churches branched off, and now it's uncountable. I think the commonality is that most rest secured that in their personal view, they have the best view. They have the best and the only exclusivity. But with the existence of soul, now in my spiritual journey, the idea of a soul was incredibly important to me. The soul was what contemplated, as far as I was concerned at that point, the search for meaning, the search for the big questions of life were all soul-driven. The understanding that this soul, our witness, as I experience it, this witness is watching your behavior, and time and place when needed will almost step in. At least you have to develop your sensitivity, your inner ear, to hear the voice amongst the din of existence. So this concept of soul, personally for me, was incredibly important. It's almost the driving force. The driving force is to get home. Home meaning who and what you really are. Which was for me, in my experience, was epitomized by Zen Buddhism, and I saw it as the quickest way to get home. Now each of us have their own path, and I would be the last one to claim any exclusivity. I think each path is equally valid. I know, I'm talking about non-dualism, I know that once you get past the nitty-gritty squabbles almost of existence of soul and blah 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 blah, that this is a sound tradition, and it has the essence of truth. And I would suggest that those of you that feel drawn to that, to pursue it. I just mentioned my own stumbling blocks with this, because to me the existence of soul was undeniable. Now, with my understanding of many years and my own journey through non-abiding and culminating in an abiding experience of awakening, with this understanding that I currently have, I believe, there's that word again, I see it's useful for me to see the concept of the soul as a useful tool. I dare to say that my level of success wouldn't have been possible without my deep identification to a soul. But now I know what's soul. The soul exists until it doesn't. And this is not some kind of weird compromise. As you reach a level, I've talked about, and it's always alluded to, steps The temples are always at the top of the stairs. If it was easy to reach, it wouldn't be so meaningful. You had to put effort to see a temple. And I've been to many beautiful examples, and I enjoy the climb. And you got to climb to see a view, don't you? Most times. So I always appreciated this concept that effort was necessary. And along with the soul, I've mentioned my spirit guides before. Dhammo, Bodhidharma is another name. Dhammo is his Chinese name, the first patriarch of Chinese Zen, Chan, is one of my spirit guides, and he's the court gesture that does somersaults. And he even wears the garb of what I would imagine a medieval European court gesture would wear. And a non-stop babble. And if you dismiss it as just noise or babble, you'll miss the gems. And basically what I came to understand is almost everything out of his mouth was a gem, was useful, needed to be stored and filed, and would be useful at another time. But mostly I heard what I was ready to hear, and what I needed to hear from him. Then I had Roger Bacon, a 13th century Franciscan mystic. He was also a wizard and an alchemist. But he also was credited by some of being one of the fathers of the scientific method, Western's outlook on science. Empiricism and experimental efforts, experimental processes to support the empiricism. But empiricism, logic, was the guy. But this comes from a mystic. He was an astrologer. And he was an alchemist, as I mentioned. And he wrote a book called, or is credited with writing a book, most people believe, the scientific evidence supports his book, The Secret of Secrets. And I mentioned the other day that the physicist Stephen Hawking talks about the theory of everything. Well, great concept, but I'd like to add the secret of secrets. Who wouldn't want to know either of those constructs, paradigms that people, two individuals separated by 800 years, 900 years, but equally intriguing and maybe equally useful. I don't know how successful, I'm not here to say how successful either Hawking was with his theory of everything. I know it's a work in progress, but he left it for others. And I feel I entertain similar feelings to Roger Bacon in that he left his body of work to be improved upon, to be added to by the coming generations. And in my mind, anything that's worth knowing, any great teacher or philosopher or thinker has open-ended, in our internet parlance, open code so that other people can have access to your programming, but they also can feel free and they're encouraged to offer improvements. This seems much more viable than closed source, and that people would hang on to their programs, their programming with such a tight grasp. So anything worth knowing is worth sharing. And sharing implies being available for others to add to it, to refine it possibly, maybe even ultimately redirect it, and worst case scenario, dismiss it out of hand. Yeah, but dismissing out of hand is probably the wrong. Dismiss after rigorous examination. How's that? But again, coming back to Roger Bacon, he's a Franciscan monk, and I experience him as a giant, maybe 8 feet tall, with the first 2 feet, no feet. He floats along. He floats. So I get a somersaulting Dhammo, Bodhidharma, spouting. And I have on contrast Roger Bacon with his wearing the brown robe of the Franciscan order with the hood pulled way over so that you couldn't see his face, or I was never even sure if he really had the face. And as he floats along, complete and utter silence. So my spirit guide is a non-stop talker, and a man of silence. Both of these concepts, both of these experiences are more than real to me. I would say supra-real. I've never had occasion to question their existence. They've just been there, and I've always considered myself fortunate and a better man with their guidance. Now, if I was a strict adherent of the non-dualistic school, I would have lost this rich and useful heritage, this rich and useful asset, this rich and useful tool that facilitated my own personal inquiry, my own personal spiritual growth. But I mentioned, as the soul, they exist until they no longer exist. I'd like to suggest that this isn't this contradictory or mind-bending idea that something exists until it doesn't exist. And by doesn't exist, that it's no longer necessary. You can put this tool down. You can give it a well-earned rest. But without that, and I've talked about surrender and the evolution of surrender. That on a first level, on one of the early levels, you learn to let go, release, the ego, and the pull of the lower senses. And you ascend, you progress to the same sensory tools, the 5 basic senses that you were given, but you experience them on a new level, on a spiritual part of your light body. And again, the idea of a soul or a light body and then the gross physical body, well, of course that's dualism, isn't it? And it would be dismissed, now I can say dismissed out of hand, because without any argument or debate, the non-dualistic school would dismiss this out of hand. Be that as it may. And seeing that ultimately they are correct. But it doesn't, I think dismissing, at least for me, dismissing the existence of a soul, of my spirit guides, at a tender stage in my own evolution, my own journey, would have been a setback, a huge setback. And I don't know if I could have overcome this setback. I don't know if I could have recovered from this setback that I dismissed out of hand. The existence of a soul, or the existence of my guides, or the existence of a witness. Because I saw some distance between witness wasn't exactly my soul. A witness was an energy always up in the corner, looking down. And this always remained faceless, not identifiable. Just a quiet voice who spoke when needed. In the evolution, we've evolved to the finer application of the senses and how they relate to the spiritual body, the light body, which I feel is, if you could put out your hands as far as you could, and twice the distance of that would be your aura, the average aura. And of course the aura takes on colors that someone who's blessed with seeing auras can quickly ascertain, make an educated guess maybe of your current spiritual condition. Invaluable tool. Now personally, I don't really see auras, I can look at you, but I do get peripheral glances. And one thing I've noticed as my discipline has improved, that my periphery, I'm able to see almost to the point of seeing behind my back. I can certainly sense, I don't know if seeing is the correct sensual description, but I can sense people get too close to me, behind me. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm very uncomfortable being too close in someone's aura, unless I've invited them into mine and they've invited me into theirs. It's a mutual sharing, and sometimes it can have the effect that the whole becomes greater than the parts. So we're talking about the the evolution of the senses, starting from gross and tending towards finer and finer applications. Now, not forgetting non-dualism, the insistence that everything is one. As you proceed, as you approach your awakening, abiding enlightenment, you have to discard your vision of yourself as a spiritual person. And that would include your witness, your guides, and the idea of soul. So as I said, they exist until they no longer exist. And I think if you look at it this way, this would decrease a lot of the confusion that neophytes, that new beginners, the new people on this search get confused about. Denial of soul almost seems, with a cursory glance, to negate spiritual advancement, spiritual growth. If your soul doesn't grow, what does? Yes. So I think for me, non-dualism, I can finally have an affinity for it. I finally get what they're talking about. But I couldn't do that at the cost of giving up the things that were so necessary to get me to the point where I was advanced, secure enough to accept and dismiss what's no longer needed as not so. There is no separation. There is no division. There is no dualism, you, me. It's a misperception, a misunderstanding. But just because it's a misperception or a misunderstanding does not mean it's without use. So we began with dualism, went on the journey to non-dualism, and here we can finally have the peace, the equanimity we always have desired.